as tomorrow is Labor Day, I thought we would start this morning with what has become a continuing theme on Flashpoint, and that's the future of work. It remains a very complicated picture at the moment. Let's talk about it with Mark Gaffney, former president of the Michigan AFL-CIO, now on the Board of Governors at Wayne State, in fact, the chair of that board. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, formerly on the Board of Governors at Wayne State, Michigan's 12th District Congresswoman, and Richard Mack, labor and employment attorney with Miller Cohen. In fact, he represented a lot of the union interests as the city of Detroit made its way through bankruptcy. Thank you all. I'm sorry?
Not on the governors.
Yes, no, not on the Board of Governors, not yet. But thank you all very much for being here. Mark, I want to start with you. Your life was defined by union life and union issues, and I'm really curious as you look around now at this complicated picture, where, as I said, we've got people at Starbucks now wanting to unionize, and yet in the traditional places, it's a murkier future. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of unions in America?
I'm optimistic, but there's a big if. Can unions change to attract, understand, organize, and work with those new kind of workers? The whole of labor law is set up out of the 1930s for a single work site. Manufacturing works very well in a collective bargaining situation. Steady labor management, not gig economy, not 24 people in 8,000 stores like Starbucks across the country. So not only does the way we do business in unions have to change, but the way we approach members and that sort of thing. If unions can make those changes, new economy, new types of work, workers that see things differently, young people are more independent, then they will do just fine. We'll be there for those workers when they want to join a union.
Congresswoman, how about you? You've worked with unions for so much of your career. Before you, your husband's tenure in Congress was almost synonymous with the Michigan labor movement. We come out of this huge, massive scandal in the UAW. In fact, I invited some UAW leadership to be here. They've declined, as they often do on the program. But what's the outlook for you?
Well, first of all, I think that this is the workers' time, that people are beginning to, again, understand the importance of a worker. I'm someone that reminds people that there are many things that we take for granted, from a 40-hour work week to safe working standards, to vacation pay, holiday pay, sick pay, health care benefits were all negotiated by unions. And those benefits still very much matter to younger people about the terms and the way that they're going to work. We do need to update laws to reflect the times, but I think there's never a better time for unions because the collective voice makes a difference in getting employees. You're beginning to see employers respond to different things. Caregiving is one of the most important things right now. Women can't find anybody to take care of their children, and they need women. So I think SEIU and some of the other non-traditional unions have been working on these issues for a while, and I think right now is the time people appreciate the worker.
You make an interesting point. Workers are standing up to be heard right now, Richard. Some of them are, telling their story with their feet. They're walking out, making different kinds of choices, demanding, for instance, unlimited paid time off, which is wild to some people. Are the unions able to meet them? Given that we've watched a lot of union benefits that we kind of felt like their stock in trade for so long. Those have dwindled. Nobody has a pension anymore, things like that. Are they there for this modern demand of the workers?
I think they can be there, absolutely. I mean, if you just think of how the circumstances are aligned, we have the way that labor laws are determined in this country is pretty much who's president. Because the president appoints the labor board, which is the overarching body that oversees and determines labor laws for private sector, which also influences public sector. We have a president that's the most labor-friendly president, right? And we have the Great Resignation. So you have the leverage in negotiating power shifting to workers. So now employers are clamoring to get employees in the door. So you have the circumstances perfectly aligned. And I think the benefit of having unions, which is the most democratic institution we have, is that it's really literally ground up. So as far as how unions can adopt, well, it's going to be the people who work in those shops, who work in those Starbucks, who work in those areas, the Trader Joe's or whatever. They're going to be the ones making the decisions, so they absolutely can adopt because they'll know what they need right as they're working day to day.
Interesting then. So is that where, and I'll let in whoever wants to weigh in on this, is that where the future of this is? Because as we look at the auto industry, for example, I've talked on the program about driving the Mustang Mach-E. Fantastic car, built in Mexico. And we're watching a lot of union labor power in the traditional places ebb. Aren't we, Mark? I mean, is the future of the union Starbucks instead of Ford and General Motors? I guess that's what I'm asking.
No, but the future is absolutely both. It's absolutely both. And unions have to be good enough to represent both kinds of workers. We're always going to make cars in this country as well. We're always going to have the argument, the debate about where certain cars ought to be made and parts and such. And unions are going to be part of that debate. But at the same time, yes, we have to organize low-wage workers. We have to figure out a way to organize gig workers. And we have a couple of unions working on that out in New York City, kind of the hotbed of gig organizing. And so we cannot give up anything that we've been good at over the years, over the last 100 years, but we also have to move into the new parts of the economy.
I want to make a couple comments. One, I'm going to comment on the UAW. What their leadership did was unforgivable. I do believe that you're going to see an election.
It doesn't just damage the UAW.
It damages all unions. And I think the new leadership of the UAW has made it clear that there is zero tolerance. They are really trying to change the reputation of the UAW, and I want to say that. I think as we talk about we need to also look at what the American unions have done. When we renegotiated NAFTA, the fact of the matter is we can't compete, although we've learned the importance of producing. It's a national security issue, and producing here in the U.S. But when we renegotiated the NAFTA, the fact of the matter is we required that Mexico raise its environmental standards, that they pay higher wages, and that they be able to, people were blocked from organizing unions from Mexico,
right.
And that got changed, and that is being enforced. So there are good...
You'd rather have the jobs, though, I'm going to assume.
No, I absolutely want to have the jobs, but I want to play on a level playing field, and I think environmental issues matter too. You know, when Tri-Bar is polluting the Huron River, I think we need to talk about what that manufacturer is also doing and having responsible environmental standards, that we're not competing with countries that don't have any environmental standards. I don't want to buy a product from a company that isn't at least environmentally sensitive.
Yeah. And I think the point, not just about the UAW, but the unions in general, the fact that they've been literally the most watched institution in our country. I mean, the LM reports they have to file, the information they have to provide. I mean, the stuff that was caught at the UAW, and they're, you know, for those who did wrong, they should be absolutely held responsible. But imagine a corporation given any level of scrutiny anywhere near something that a labor union is given. But because of that, they've been able to maintain the trust of large percentages of their membership, because they know that they are in this huge fishbowl. And now that they're adopting to these different economies, and now that they're adopting, and absolutely there needs to be a level playing field. And now we're getting that. What we're going to see, and I really believe that what we're going to see is an upsurge like we have been seeing. 58% of petitions have been increased as far as filing for organizations within the last year. So that means that almost to unionize, that means, you know, almost 60% of the individuals in this country have said, more than that, have said, I want to go form a union. And that's going to continue to grow because they're seeing the value of bargaining together. They're seeing the value of coming together and negotiating their wages and benefits.
Yeah, interesting.
Gallup does a poll near Labor Day every year. Favorability ratings of unions this year is the highest it's been in decades. 71% of American people say that unions have an important role to play in the economy.
Let me ask you about right to work then. In Michigan, we had those on one side saying it was going to, if we adopt right to work, it was going to really open the gates for business in Michigan.
Didn't
on the
happen.
other side,
Nope.
well, but the other side said it was going to be a disaster if we became right to work. That didn't happen either.
So it's a political argument. It really doesn't have all that much to do with workers clamoring to be in or out of unions. It is a political argument to harm unions' budgets that would have otherwise been used for politics.
And I'm actually going to tell you that I would disagree with you. I think that it's complicated, but we didn't get Ford's Tennessee or Kentucky plant, and one of the factors in there. But I'll tell you what, those workers in Kentucky and Tennessee and where other auto plants go, they benefit from what the UAW negotiates, because those benefits that are negotiated here by that union are given by those companies to those workers. So there are two sides to all of this.
Devin, you've mentioned the bankruptcy. What always happens, perfect point, when unions negotiate something, it's not just for those people who are in the union, it's for everyone in the economy. When the bankruptcy ended, there was an increase negotiated for those workers who were in the union. And what do we see for the non-union workers? What do we see for city council? I mean, it always happens that when unions benefit, not just themselves, but the entire economy, and that's going to continue to happen.
Good thought to end there with as we head toward Labor Day. Gang, thanks very much for a great conversation.
Thank you.